Chapter 7. Recognition. A timid girl. Bathsheba withdrew into the shade. She scarcely knew whether most to be amused at the singularity of the meeting, or to be concerned at its awkwardness. There was room for a little pity, also for a very little exultation, the former at his position, and the latter at her own. Embarrassed she was not, and she remembered Gabriel's declaration of love to her at Norcombe, only to think she had nearly forgotten it. "Yes," she murmured, putting on an air of dignity, and turning again to him with a little warmth of cheek. "I do want a shepherd, but—" "He's the very man, ma'am," said one of the villagers quietly. Conviction breeds conviction. "Ah, that 'a is," said a second decisively. "The man truly," said a third with heartiness. "He's all there," said number 4 fervidly. "Then will you tell him to speak to the bailiff?" said Bathsheba. All was practical again now. A summer eve and loneliness would have been necessary to give the meeting its proper fullness of romance. The bailiff was pointed out to Gabriel, who, checking the palpitation within his breast at discovering that this Ashtoreth of strange report was only a modification of Venus, the well-known and admired, retired with him to talk over the necessary preliminaries of hiring. The fire before them wasted away. "Men," said Bathsheba, "you shall take a little refreshment after this extra work. Will you come to the house?" "We could knock in a bit and a drop a good deal freer, miss, if so be you'd send it to Warren's Malthouse," replied the spokesman. Bathsheba then rode off into the darkness, and the men straggled on to the village in twos and threes, Oak and the bailiff being left by the rick alone. "And now," said the bailiff finally, "all is settled, I think, about your coming, and I'm going home along. Good night to ye, shepherd." "Can you get me a lodging?" inquired Gabriel. "That I can't indeed," he said, moving past Oak as a Christian edges past an offertory plate when he does not mean to contribute. "If you follow on the road till you come to Warren's Malthouse, where they're all gone to have their snap of victuals, I dare say some of 'em will tell you of a place. Good night to ye, shepherd." The bailiff, who showed this nervous dread of loving his neighbour as himself, went up the hill, and Oak walked on to the village, still astonished at the rencounter with Bathsheba, glad of his nearness to her, and perplexed at the rapidity with which the unpractised girl of Norcombe had developed into the supervising and cool woman here. But some women only require an emergency to make them fit for one. Obliged to some extent to forego dreaming in order to find the way, he reached the churchyard, and passed round it under the wall, where several ancient trees grew. There was a wide margin of grass along here, and Gabriel's footsteps were deadened by its softness, even at this indurating period of the year. When abreast of a trunk which appeared to be the oldest of the old, he became aware that a figure was standing behind it. Gabriel did not pause in his walk, and in another moment he accidentally kicked a loose stone. The noise was enough to disturb the motionless stranger, who started and assumed a careless position. It was a slim girl, rather thinly clad. "Good night to you," said Gabriel heartily. "Good night," said the girl to Gabriel. The voice was unexpectedly attractive. It was the low and dulcet note suggestive of romance, common in descriptions and rare in experience. "I'll thank you to tell me if I'm in the way for Warren's Malthouse," Gabriel resumed, primarily to gain the information, indirectly to get more of the music. "Quite right. It's at the bottom of the hill. And do you know—" The girl hesitated, and then went on again. "Do you know how late they keep open the Buck's Head Inn?" She seemed to be won by Gabriel's heartiness, as Gabriel had been won by her modulations. "I don't know where the Buck's Head is, or anything about it. Do you think of going there to-night?" "Yes." The woman again paused. There was no necessity for any continuance of speech, and the fact that she did add more seemed to proceed from an unconscious desire to show unconcern by making a remark, which is noticeable in the ingenuous when they are acting by stealth. "You are not a Weatherbury man," she said timorously. "I am not. I am the new shepherd, just arrived." "Only a shepherd, and you seem almost a farmer by your ways." "Only a shepherd," Gabriel repeated in a dull cadence of finality. His thoughts were directed to the past. his eyes to the feet of the girl, and for the first time he saw lying there a bundle of some sort. She may have perceived the direction of his face, for she said coaxingly, "You won't say anything in the parish about having seen me here, will you? At least not for a day or two." "I won't if you wish me not to," said Oak. "Thank you, indeed," the other replied. "I am rather poor, and I don't want people to know anything about me." Then she was silent and shivered. "You ought to have a cloak on such a cold night," Gabriel observed. "I would advise you to get indoors." "Oh, no. Would you mind going on and leaving me? I thank you much for what you have told me." "I will go on," he said, adding hesitatingly, "Since you are not very well off, perhaps you would accept this trifle from me. It's only a shilling, but it's all I have to spare." "Yes, I will take it," said the stranger gratefully. She extended her hand, Gabriel his. In feeling for each other's palm in the gloom before the money could be passed, a minute incident occurred which told much. Gabriel's finger alighted on the young woman's wrist. It was beating with a throb of tragic intensity. He had frequently felt the same quick, hard beat in the femoral artery of his lambs when overdriven. It suggested a consumption too great of a vitality which, to judge from her figure and stature, was already too little. "What is the matter?" "Nothing." "Ah, but there is." "No, no, no. Let your having seen me be a secret." "Very well, I will. Good night again." "Good night." The young girl remained motionless by the tree, and Gabriel descended into the village of Weatherbury, or Lower Longpuddle, as it was sometimes called. He fancied that he had felt himself in the penumbra of a very deep sadness when touching that slight and fragile creature. But wisdom lies in moderating mere impressions, and Gabriel endeavoured to think little of this. Chapter 8. The Malthouse, the Chat, News. Warren's Malthouse was enclosed by an old wall enwrapped with ivy, and though not much of the exterior was visible at this hour, the character and purposes of the building were clearly enough shown by its outline upon the sky. From the walls an overhanging thatched roof sloped up to a point in the centre, upon which rose a small wooden lantern, fitted with louver boards on all the four sides, and from these openings a mist was dimly perceived to be escaping into the night air. There was no window in front, but a square hole in the door was glazed with a single pane, through which red comfortable rays now stretched out upon the ivied wall in front. Voices were to be heard inside. Oak's hand skimmed the surface of the door with fingers extended to an Elymas the Sorcerer pattern, till he found a leathern strap, which he pulled. This lifted the wooden latch, and the door swung open. The room inside was lighted only by the ruddy glow from the kiln mouth, which shone over the floor with the streaming horizontality of the setting sun, and threw upwards the shadows of all facial irregularities in those assembled around. The stone flag floor was worn into a path from the doorway to the kiln, and into undulations everywhere. A curved settle of unplaned oak stretched along one side, and in a remote corner was a small bed and bedstead, the owner and frequent occupier of which was the maltster. This aged man was now sitting opposite the fire, his frosty white hair and beard overgrowing his gnarled figure like the grey moss and lichen upon a leafless apple tree. He wore breeches and the laced-up shoes called ankle-jacks. He kept his eyes fixed upon the fire. Gabriel's nose was greeted by an atmosphere laden with the sweet smell of new malt. The conversation, which seemed to have been concerning the origin of the fire, immediately ceased, and everyone ocularly criticized him to the degree expressed by contracting the flesh of their foreheads and looking at him with narrowed eyelids, as if he had been a light too strong for their sight. Several exclaimed meditatively, after this operation had been completed, "Ah, 'tis a new shepherd, I believe." "We thought we heard a hand pawing about the door for the bobbin, but weren't sure 'twere not a dead leaf blowed across," said another. "Come in, shepherd. Sure ye be welcome, though we don't know your name." "Gabriel Oak, that's my name, neighbours." The ancient maltster, sitting in the midst, turned at this, his turning being as the turning of a rusty crane. "That's never Gable Oak's grandson over at Norcombe, never," he said, as a formula expressive of surprise, which nobody was supposed for a moment to take literally.
"My father and my grandfather were old men of the name of Gabriel," said the shepherd placidly. "Thought I knowed the man's face as I seed him on the rick. Thought I did. And where be you trading off to now, shepherd?" "I'm thinking of biding here," said Mr. Oak. "Knowed your grandfather for years and years," continued the maltster, the words coming forth of their own accord, as if the momentum previously imparted had been sufficient. "Ah, and did you?" "Knowed your grandmother." "And her too?" "Likewise knowed your father when he was a child. Why, my boy Jacob there and your father were sworn brothers, that they were, sure. Weren't you, Jacob?" "Ah, sure," said his son, a young man about 65, with a semi-bald head and one tooth in the left centre of his upper jaw, which made much of itself by standing prominent, like a milestone in a bank. "But 'twas Joe had most to do with him. However, my son William must have knowed the very man afore us. Didn't ye, Billy, afore you left Norcombe?" "No, 'twas Andrew," said Jacob's son Billy, a child of 40 or thereabouts, who manifested the peculiarity of possessing a cheerful soul in a gloomy body, and whose whiskers were assuming a chinchilla shade here and there. "I can mind Andrew," said Oak, "as being a man in the place when I was quite a child." "Ah, and the other day I and my youngest daughter Liddy were over at my grandson's christening," continued Billy. "We were talking about this very family, and 'twas only last purification day in this very world, when the use money is gied away to the second best poor folk, you know, shepherd. And I can mind the day, because they all had to traipse up to the vestry. Yes, this very man's family." "Come, shepherd, and drink. 'Tis gape and swaller with us. A drop of summat, but not of much account," said the maltster, removing from the fire his eyes, which were vermilion red and bleared by gazing into it for so many years. "Take up the God forgive me, Jacob, and see if 'tis warm, Jacob." Jacob stooped to the God forgive me, which was a two-handled tall mug standing in the ashes, cracked and charred with heat. It was rather furred with extraneous matter about the outside, especially in the crevices of the handles, the innermost curves of which may not have seen daylight for several years by reason of this encrustation thereon, formed of ashes accidentally wetted with cider and baked hard. But to the mind of any sensible drinker the cup was no worse for that, being incontestably clean on the inside and about the rim. It may be observed that such a class of mug is called a "God forgive me" in Weatherbury and its vicinity for uncertain reasons, probably because its size makes any given toper feel ashamed of himself when he sees its bottom in drinking it empty. Jacob, on receiving the order to see if the liquor was warm enough, placidly dipped his forefinger into it by way of thermometer, and having pronounced it nearly of the proper degree, raised the cup and very civilly attempted to dust some of the ashes from the bottom with the skirt of his smock-frock, because Shepherd Oak was a stranger. "A clean cup for the shepherd," said the maltster commandingly. "No, not at all," said Gabriel in a reproving tone of considerateness. "I never fuss about dirt in its pure state, and when I know what sort it is." Taking the mug, he drank an inch or more from the depths of its contents, and duly passed it to the next man. "Ah, I wouldn't think of giving such trouble to neighbours and washing up when there's so much work to be done in the world already," continued Oak in a moister tone, after recovering from the stoppage of breath which is occasioned by pulls at large mugs. "A right sensible man," said Jacob. "True, true, it can't be gainsaid," observed a brisk young man, Mark Clark by name, a genial and pleasant gentleman, whom to meet anywhere in your travels was to know was to drink with, and to drink with was, unfortunately, to pay for. "And here's a mouthful of bread and bacon that missus have sent, shepherd. The cider'll go down better with a bit of victuals. Don't ye chalk quite close, shepherd, for I let the bacon fall in the road outside as I was bringing it along, and it may be 'tis rather gritty. There, 'tis plain dirt, and we all know what that is, as you say, and you bain't a particular man we see, shepherd." "True, true, not at all," said the friendly Oak. "Don't let your teeth quite meet, and you won't feel the sandiness at all. 'Tis wonderful what can be done by contrivance." "My own mind exactly, neighbour." "Ah, he's his grandfer's own grandson. His grandfer were just such a nice unparticular man," said the maltster. "Drink, Henry Fray, drink," magnanimously said Jan Coggan, a person who held St. Simonian notions of share and share alike where liquor was concerned, as the vessel showed signs of approaching him in its gradual revolution among them. Having at this moment reached the end of a wistful gaze into mid-air, Henry did not refuse. He was a man of more than middle age, with eyebrows high up in his forehead, who laid it down that the law of the world was bad, with a long-suffering look through his listeners at the world alluded to, as it presented itself to his imagination. He always signed his name Henery, strenuously insisting upon that spelling, and if any passing schoolmaster ventured to remark that the second E was superfluous and old-fashioned, he received the reply that Henery was the name he was christened, and the name he would stick to, in the tone of one to whom orthographical differences were matters which had a great deal to do with personal character. Mr. Jan Coggan, who had passed the cup to Henery, was a crimson man with a spacious countenance and private glimmer in his eye, whose name had appeared on the marriage register of Weatherbury and the neighbouring parishes as best man and chief witness in countless unions of the previous 20 years. He also very frequently filled the post of head godfather in baptisms of the subtly jovial kind. "Come, Mark Clark, come, there's plenty more in the barrel," said Jan. "That I will. 'Tis my only doctor," replied Mr. Clark, who, 20 years younger than Jan Coggan, revolved in the same orbit. He secreted mirth on all occasions for special discharge at popular parties. "Why, Joseph Poorgrass, ye hadn't had a drop," said Mr. Coggan to a self-conscious man in the background, thrusting the cup towards him. "Such a modest man as he is," said Jacob Smallbury. "Why, you've hardly had strength of eye enough to look in our young missus's face, so I hear, Joseph." All looked at Joseph Poorgrass with pitying reproach. "No, I've hardly looked at her at all," simpered Joseph, reducing his body smaller whilst talking, apparently from a meek sense of undue prominence. "And when I seed her, 'twas nothing but blushes with me." "Poor feller," said Mr. Clark. "'Tis a curious nature for a man," said Jan Coggan. "Yes," continued Joseph Poorgrass, his shyness, which was so painful as a defect, filling him with a mild complacency, now that it was regarded as an interesting study. "'Twere blush, blush, blush with me every minute of the time when she was speaking to me." "I believe you, Joseph Poorgrass, for we all know you to be a very bashful man." "'Tis an awkward gift for a man, poor soul," said the maltster. "And how long have you suffered from it, Joseph?" "Oh, ever since I was a boy. Yes, mother was concerned to her heart about it, yes, but 'twas all naught." "Did you ever go into the world and try to stop it, Joseph Poorgrass?" "I tried all sorts of company. They took me to Greenhill Fair, and into a great gay jerry-go-nimble show, where there were women folk riding around, standing upon horses, with hardly anything on but their smocks, but it didn't cure me a morsel. And then I was put errand man at the woman's skittle alley at the back of the Tailor's Arms in Casterbridge. 'Twas a horrible sinful situation, and a very curious place for a good man. I had to stand and look bawdy people in the face from morning till night. But 'twas no use, I was just as bad as ever after all. Blushes have been in the family for generations. There, 'tis a happy providence that I be no worse." "True," said Jacob Smallbury, deepening his thoughts to a profounder view of the subject. "'Tis a thought to look at, that ye might have been worse. But even as you be, 'tis a very bad affliction for 'ee, Joseph. For you see, shepherd, though 'tis very well for a woman, dang it all, 'tis awkward for a man like him, poor fella." "Yes, 'tis," said Gabriel, recovering from a meditation. "Yes, very awkward for the man." "Ay, and he's very timid too," observed Jan Coggan. "Once he had been working late at Yalbury Bottom, and had had a drop of drink, and lost his way as he was coming home along through Yalbury Wood. Didn't he, Master Poorgrass?" "No, no, not that story," expostulated the modest man, forcing a laugh to bury his concern. "And so lost himself quite," continued Mr. Coggan with an impassive face, implying that a true narrative, like time and tide, must run its course and would respect no man. "And as he was coming along in the middle of the night, much afeard and not able to find his way out of the trees nohow, it cried out, 'Man alost! Man alost!' A owl in a tree happened to be crying, 'Hoo, hoo, hoo,' as owls do, you know, shepherd." Gabriel nodded. "And Joseph, all in a tremble, said, 'Joseph Poorgrass of Weatherbury, sir.'" "No, no, now that's too much," said the timid man, becoming a man of brazen courage all of a sudden. I didn't say sir. I'll take my oath I didn't say Joseph Poorgrass of Weatherbury, sir. No, no, what's right is right, and I never said sir to the bird, knowing very well that no man of a gentleman's rank would be hollering there at that time of night. Joseph Poorgrass of Weatherbury, that's every word I said, and I shouldn't have said that if it hadn't been for Keeper Day's metheglin. There, 'twas a merciful thing it ended where it did."
The question of which was right being tacitly waived by the company, Jan went on meditatively.
"And he's a fearfullest man, bain't you, Joseph? Ay, another time you were lost by Lammindown Gate, weren't you, Joseph?" "I was," replied Poorgrass, as if there were some conditions too serious even for modesty to remember itself under, this being one. "Yes, that were in the middle of the night too. The gate would not open, try how he would, and knowing there was the devil's hand in it, he kneeled down." "Ah," said Joseph, acquiring confidence from the warmth of the fire, the cider, and a perception of the narrative capabilities of the experience alluded to. "My heart died within me that time, but I kneeled down and said the Lord's Prayer, and then the belief right through, and then the 10 Commandments in earnest prayer. But no, the gate wouldn't open, and then went on with dearly beloved brethren, and thinks I, this makes 4, and 'tis all I know out of the book, and if this don't do it, nothing will, and I'm a lost man. Well, when I got to saying after me, I rose from my knees and found that the gate would open. Yes, neighbours, the gate opened the same as ever." A meditation on the obvious inference was indulged in by all, and during its continuance each directed his vision into the ash pit, which glowed like a desert in the tropics under a vertical sun, shaping their eyes long and liney, partly because of the light, partly from the depth of the subject discussed. Gabriel broke the silence. "What sort of place is this to live at? And what sort of missus is she to work under?" Gabriel's bosom thrilled gently as he thus slipped under the notice of the assembly the innermost subject of his heart. "We know little of her, nothing. She only showed herself a few days ago. Her uncle was took bad, and the doctor was called with his world-wide skill, but he couldn't save the man. As I take it, she's going to keep on the farm." "That's about the shape of it, I believe," said Jan Coggan. "Ah, 'tis a very good family. I'd as soon be under them as under one here and there. Her uncle was a very fair sort of man. Did you know him, shepherd? A bachelor man?" "Not at all." "I used to go to his house a courting my first wife, Charlotte, who was his dairymaid. Well, a very good-hearted man were Farmer Everdene, and I, being a respectable young fellow, was allowed to call and see her, and drink as much ale as I liked, but not to carry away any. Outside of my skin, I mean, of course." "Ah, Jan Coggan, we know your meaning." "And you see, 'twas beautiful ale, and I wished to value his kindness as much as I could, and not to be so ill-mannered as to drink only a thimbleful, which would have been insulting to the man's generosity." "True, Master Coggan, 'twould so," corroborated Mark Clark. "And so I used to eat a lot of salt fish afore going, and then by the time I got there I were as dry as a lime basket. So thoroughly dry that ale would slip down. Ah, 'twould slip down sweet. Happy times, heavenly times. Such lovely drunks as I used to have at that house. You can mind, Jacob. You used to go with me sometimes." I can," said Jacob. "That one too that we had at the Buck's Head on a White Monday was a pretty tipple." "'Twas, but for a wet of the better class, that brought you no nearer to the horned man than you were before you begun. There was none like those in Farmer Everdene's kitchen. Not a single dam allowed. No, not a bare poor one, even at the most cheerful moment when all were blindest, though the good old word of sin thrown in here and there at such times is a great relief to a merry soul." "True," said the maltster. "Nature requires her swearing at regular times, or she's not herself, and unholy exclamations is a necessity of life." "But Charlotte," continued Coggan, "not a word of the sort would Charlotte allow, nor the smallest item of taking in vain. Ah, poor Charlotte! I wonder if she'd had the good fortune to get into heaven when I died. But I never was much in luck's way, and perhaps it went downwards after all, poor soul."
"And did any of you know Miss Everdene's father and mother?" inquired the shepherd, who found some difficulty in keeping the conversation in the desired channel.
"I knew him a little," said Jacob Smallbury, "but they were townsfolk and didn't live here. They've been dead for years. Father, what sort of people were Mrs.'s father and mother?" "Well," said the maltster, "he wasn't much to look at, but she was a lovely woman. He was fond enough of her as a sweetheart." "Used to kiss her scores and long hundreds of times, so 'twas said," observed Coggan. "He was very proud of her, too, when they were married, as I've been told," said the maltster. "Ay," said Coggan, "he admired her so much that he used to light the candle 3 times a night to look at her." "Boundless love! I shouldn't have supposed it in the universe," murmured Joseph Poorgrass, who habitually spoke on a large scale in his moral reflections. "Well, to be sure," said Gabriel. "Oh, 'tis true enough. I know the man and woman both well. Levi Everdene, that was the man's name, sure. Man, sayeth I in my hurry, but he were of a higher circle of life than that. 'A was a gentleman tailor really, worth scores of pounds, and he became a very celebrated bankrupt 2 or 3 times." "Oh, I thought he was quite a common man," said Joseph. "Oh, no, no. That man failed for heaps of money, hundreds in gold and silver."
The maltster being rather short of breath, Mr. Coggan, after absently scrutinizing a coal which had fallen among the ashes, took up the narrative with a private twirl of his eye.
"Well, now, you'd hardly believe it, but that man, our Miss Everdene's father, was one of the ficklest husbands alive, after a while. Understand, I didn't want to be fickle, but he couldn't help it. The poor fellow were faithful and true enough to her in his wish, but his heart would rove, do what he would. He spoke to me in real tribulation about it once. 'Coggan,' he said, 'I could never wish for a handsomer woman than I've got, but feeling she's ticketed as my lawful wife, I can't help my wicked heart wandering, do what I will.' But alas, I believe he cured it by making her take off her wedding ring and calling her by her maiden name, as they sat together after the shop was shut, and so I would get to fancy she was only a sweetheart and not married to him at all. And as soon as he could thoroughly fancy he was doing wrong and committing the seventh, I got to like her as well as ever, and they lived on a perfect picture of mutual love." "Well, that was a most ungodly remedy," murmured Joseph Poorgrass. "But we ought to feel deep cheerfulness that a happy providence kept it from being any worse. You see, he might have gone the bad road, and given his eyes to unlawfulness entirely. Yes, gross unlawfulness, so to say it." "You see," said Bill Smallbury, "the man's will was to do right, sure enough, but his heart didn't chime in. He got so much better that he was quite godly in his later years, wasn't he, Jan?" said Joseph Poorgrass. "He got himself confirmed over again in a more serious way, and took to saying Amen almost as loud as the clerk, and he liked to copy comforting verses from the tombstones. He used to hold the money plate at 'Let your light so shine,' and stand godfather to poor little come-by-chance children. And he kept a missionary box on his table, to nab folks unawares when they called. Yeah, and he would box the charity boys' ears if they laughed in church till they could hardly stand upright, and do other deeds of piety natural to the saintly inclined." "Ay, and at that time he thought of nothing but high things," added Billy Smallbury. "One day Parson Thirdly met him and said, 'Good morning, Mr. Everdene, 'tis a fine day.' 'Amen,' said Everdene, quite absent-like, thinking only of religion when he see the parson. Yes, he was a very Christian man." "Their daughter was not at all a pretty child at that time," said Henery Fray. "Never should have thought she'd have growed up such a handsome body as she is." "'Tis to be hoped her temper's as good as her face." "Well, yes, but the bailie'll have most to do with the business than ourselves. Ah!" Henery gazed in the ash-pit and smiled volumes of ironical knowledge. "A queer Christian, like a devil's head in a cowl, as the saying is," volunteered Mark Clark. Footnote: This phrase is a conjectural emendation of the unintelligible expression, "as the devil said to the owl," used by the natives. End of footnote. "He is," said Henery, implying that irony must cease at a certain point. "Between we two, man and man, I believe that man would as soon tell a lie on Sundays as working days. That I do." "Good faith, you do talk," said Gabriel. "True enough," said the man of bitter moods, looking round upon the company with the antithetic laughter that comes from a keener appreciation of the miseries of life than ordinary men are capable of. "Ha! There's people of one sort and people of another, but that man, bless your souls!" Gabriel thought fit to change the subject. "You must be a very aged man, Malter, to have sons growed mild and ancient," he remarked. "Father's so old that I can't mind his age, can he, father?" interposed Jacob. "And he's growed terrible crooked too lately," Jacob continued, surveying his father's figure, which was rather more bowed than his own. "Really, one may say that father there is three double." "Crooked folk will last a long while," said the maltster, grimly, and not in the best humour. "Shepherd would like to hear the pedigree of your life, father, wouldn't ye, shepherd?" "Ay, that I should," said Gabriel, with the heartiness of a man who had longed to hear it for several months. "What may your age be, malter?" The maltster cleared his throat in an exaggerated form for emphasis, and, elongating his gaze to the remotest point of the ash pit, said in the slow speech justifiable when the importance of a subject is so generally felt that any mannerism must be tolerated in getting at it. "Well, I don't mind the year I were born in, but perhaps I can reckon up the places I've lived at, and so get it that way. I bode at Upper Longpuddle, across there," nodding to the north, "till I were 11. Bode 7 at Kingsbere," nodding to the east, "where I took to malting. I went therefrom to Norcombe, and malted there 22 years, and 22 years I was there turnip hoeing and harvesting. Ah, I know that old place Norcombe years afore you were thought of, Master Oak." Oak smiled sincere belief in the fact. "Then I malted at Durnover 4 years, and 4 year turnip hoeing. And I was 14 times 11 months at Millpond St. Jude's," nodding north-west by north. "Old Twills wouldn't hire me for more than 11 months at a time to keep me from being chargeable to the parish, if so be I was disabled. Then I was 3 years at Mellstock, and I've been here 31 year come Candlemas. Now how much is that?" "117," chuckled another old gentleman given to mental arithmetic and little conversation, who had hitherto sat unobserved in a corner. "Well, then, that's my age," said the maltster emphatically. "Oh, no, father," said Jacob. "Your turnip hoeing were in the summer and your malting in the winter of the same years, and we don't ought to count both halves, father." "Chock it all, I lived through the summers, didn't I? That's my question. I suppose you'll say next I'll be no age at all to speak of." "Sure we shan't," said Gabriel soothingly. "You be a very old age person, malter," attested Jan Coggan, also soothingly. "We all know that, and you must have a wonderful talented constitution to be able to live so long, mustn't ye, neighbours?" "True, true, you must, maltster, wonderful," said the meeting unanimously. The maltster, being now pacified, was even generous enough to voluntarily disparage in a slight degree the virtue of having lived a great many years, by mentioning that the cup they were drinking out of was 3 years older than he. While the cup was being examined, the end of Gabriel Oak's flute became visible over his smock-frock pocket, and Henery Fray exclaimed, "Surely, shepherd, I seed you blowing into a great flute by now at Casterbridge." "You did," said Gabriel, blushing faintly. "I've been in great trouble, neighbours, and was driven to it. I used not to be so poor as I be now." "Never mind, Hart," said Mark Clark. "You should take it careless like, shepherd, and your time will come. But we could thank ye for a tune, if ye bain't too tired." "Neither drum nor trumpet have I heard since Christmas," said Jan Coggan. "Come, raise a tune, Master Oak." "Ah, that I will," said Gabriel, pulling out his flute and putting it together. "A poor tool, neighbours, but such as I can do ye shall have and welcome." Oak then struck up "Jockey to the Fair," and played that sparkling melody 3 times through, accenting the notes in the third round in a most artistic and lively manner by bending his body in small jerks and tapping with his foot to beat time. "He can blow the flute very well, that 'a can," said a young married man, who, having no individuality worth mentioning, was known as Susan Tall's husband. He continued, "I'd as lief as not be able to blow a flute as well as that." "He's a clever man, and 'tis true comfort for us to have such a shepherd," murmured Joseph Poorgrass in a soft cadence. "We ought to feel full of thanksgiving that he's not a player of bawdy songs instead of these merry tunes, for 'twould have been just as easy for God to have made the shepherd a loose, low man, a man of iniquity, so to speak, as what he is. Yes, for our wives' and daughters' sakes we should feel real thanksgiving." "True, true, real thanksgiving.
dashed in Mark Clark conclusively, not feeling it to be of any consequence to his opinion that he had only heard about a word and three-quarters of what Joseph had said. "Yes," added Joseph, beginning to feel like a man in the Bible, "for evil do thrive so in these times, that ye may be as much deceived in the cleanest shaved and whitest shirtedest man as in the raggedest tramp on the turnpike, if I may term it so." "Ah, I can mind your face now, shepherd," said Henery Fray, criticizing Gabriel with misty eyes as he entered upon his second tune. "Yes, now I see ye blowing into the flute, I know ye to be the same man I see playing at Casterbridge, for your mouth were scrimped up and your eyes a staring out like a strangleman's, just as they be now." "'Tis a pity that playing the flute should make a man look such a scarecrow," observed Mr. Mark Clark, with additional criticism of Gabriel's countenance, the latter person jerking out, with the ghastly grimace required by the instrument, the chorus of Dame Durden. "'Twas Moll and Beth and Doll and Kate and Dorothy Draggletail." "I hope you don't mind that young man's bad manners in naming your features," whispered Joseph to Gabriel. "Not at all," said Mr. Oak. "For by nature ye be a very handsome man, shepherd," continued Joseph Poorgrass, with winning suavity. "Ah, that ye be, shepherd," said the company. "Thank you very much," said Oak in the modest tone good manners demanded, thinking, however, that he would never let Bathsheba see him playing the flute. In this resolve showing a discretion equal to that related to its sagacious inventress, the divine Minerva herself. "Ah, when I and my wife were married at Norcombe Church," said the old maltster, not pleased at finding himself left out of the subject, "we were called the handsomest couple in the neighbourhood. Everybody said so." "Danged if you bain't holler now, malter," said a voice with the vigour natural to the enunciation of a remarkably evident truism. It came from the old man in the background, whose offensiveness and spiteful ways were barely atoned for by the occasional chuckle he contributed to general laughs. "Oh, no, no," said Gabriel. "Don't you play no more, shepherd," said Susan Tall's husband, the young married man who had spoken once before. "I must be moving, and when there's tunes going on I seem as if hung on wires. If I thought after I'd left that music was still playing, and I not there, I should be quite melancholy like." "What's your hurry then, Laban?" inquired Coggan. "You used to bide as late as the latest." "Well, you see, neighbours, I was lately married to a woman, and she's my vocation now, and so you see—" The young man halted lamely. "New lords, new laws, as the saying is, I suppose," remarked Coggan. "Ah, I believe," said Susan Tall's husband, in a tone intended to imply his habitual reception of jokes without minding them at all. The young man then wished them good night and withdrew. Henry Fray was the first to follow. Then Gabriel arose and went off with Jan Coggan, who had offered him a lodging. A few minutes later, when the remaining ones were on their legs and about to depart, Fray came back again in a hurry. Flourishing his finger ominously, he threw a gaze teeming with tidings, just where his eye alighted by accident, which happened to be in Joseph Poorgrass's face. "Oh, what's the matter? What's the matter, Henry?" said Joseph, starting back. "What's a brewing, Henery?" asked Jacob and Mark Clark. "Baily Pennyways, Baily Pennyways. I said so. Yes, I said so." "What, found out stealing anything?" "Stealing it is. The news is that after Miss Everdene got home she went out again to see all was safe, as she usually do, and coming in found Baily Pennyways creeping down the granary steps with half a bushel of barley. She fleed at him like a cat. Never such a tomboy as she is. Of course, I speak with closed doors." You do, Henery." "She fleed at him, and to cut a long story short, he owned to having carried off 5 sack altogether, upon her promising not to prosecute him. Well, he's turned out neck and crop, and my question is, who's going to be baily now?" The question was such a profound one that Henery was obliged to drink there and then from the large cup till the bottom was distinctly visible inside. Before he had replaced it on the table, in came the young man, Susan Tall's husband, in a still greater hurry. "Have you heard the news that's all over parish?" "About Baily Pennyways?" "But besides that?" "No, not a morsel of it," they replied, looking into the very midst of Laban Tall as if to meet his words half-way down his throat. "What a night of horrors!" murmured Joseph Poorgrass, waving his hand spasmodically. "I've had the news bell ringing in my left ear quite bad enough for a murder, and I've seen a magpie all alone."
Fanny Robin, Miss Everdene's youngest servant, can't be found. They've been wanting to lock up the doors these 2 hours, but she isn't come in, and they don't know what to do about going to bed for fear of locking her out. They wouldn't be so concerned if she hadn't been noticed in such low spirits these last few days. And Mary Ann to think the beginning of a crowner's inquest has happened to the poor girl." "Ah, 'tis burned, 'tis burned," came from Joseph Poorgrass's dry lips. "No, 'tis drowned," said Tall. "Or 'tis her father's razor," suggested Bill Smallbury, with a vivid sense of detail. "Well, Miss Everdene wants to speak to one or two of us before we go to bed. What with this trouble about the baily, and now about the girl, missus is almost wild." They all hastened up the lane to the farmhouse, excepting the old maltster, whom neither news, fire, rain, nor thunder could draw from his hole. There, as the other's footsteps died away, he sat down again, and continued gazing as usual into the furnace with his red, bleared eyes. From the bedroom window above their heads, Bathsheba's head and shoulders, robed in mystic white, were dimly seen extended into the air. "Are any of my men among you?" she said anxiously. "Yes, ma'am, several," said Susan Tall's husband. "Tomorrow morning I wish 2 or 3 of you to make inquiries in the villages round if they have seen such a person as Fanny Robin. Do it quietly, there's no reason for alarm as yet. She must have left whilst we were all at the fire." "Beg your pardon, but had she any young man courting her in the parish, ma'am?" asked Jacob Smallbury. "I don't know," said Bathsheba. "I never heard any such thing, ma'am," said 2 or 3. "It is hardly likely either," continued Bathsheba, "for any lover of hers might have come to the house if he had been a respectable lad. The most mysterious matter connected with her absence, indeed the only thing which gives me serious alarm, is that she was seen to go out of the house by Mary Ann with only her indoor working gown on, and not even a bonnet." "And you mean, ma'am, excusing my words, that a young woman would hardly go to see a young man without dressing up," said Jacob, turning his mental vision upon past experiences. "That's true, she would not, ma'am." "She had, I think, a bundle, though I couldn't see very well," said a female voice from another window, which seemed that of Mary Ann. "But she had no young man about here. Hers lives in Casterbridge, and I believe he's a soldier." "Do you know his name?" Bathsheba said. "No, mistress. She was very close about it." "Perhaps I might be able to find out if I went to Casterbridge barracks," said William Smallbury. "Very well. If she doesn't return tomorrow, mind you go there and try to discover which man it is, and see him. I feel more responsible than I should if she had had any friends or relations alive. I do hope she has come to no harm through a man of that kind. And then there's this disgraceful affair of the bailiff, but I can't speak of him now." Bathsheba had so many reasons for uneasiness that it seemed she did not think it worth while to dwell upon any particular one. "Do as I told you, then," she said in conclusion, closing the casement. "Aye, aye, missus, we will," they replied, and moved away. That night at Coggan's, Gabriel Oak, beneath the screen of closed eyelids, was busy with fancies, and full of movement, like a river flowing rapidly under its ice. Night had always been the time at which he saw Bathsheba most vividly, and through the slow hours of shadow he tenderly regarded her image now. It is rarely that the pleasures of the imagination will compensate for their pain of sleeplessness, but they possibly did with Oak tonight, for the delight of merely seeing her effaced for the time his perception of the great difference between seeing and possessing. He also thought of plans for fetching his few utensils and books from Norcombe. The young man's best companion, the farrier's sure guide, the veterinary surgeon, Paradise Lost, the Pilgrim's Progress, Robinson Crusoe, Ash's Dictionary, and Wilkingame's Arithmetic constituted his library, and though a limited series, it was one from which he had acquired more sound information by diligent perusal than many a man of opportunity has done from a furlong of laden shelves.